Evening, everyone. Tonight, Shirley Nishmat Avimori Dober Meredun Halevi Imi Maroti Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And this week we have the privilege of reading Parshat Balak, which is one of the most interesting stories in the Torah because it is the only story in the Torah, uh, other than, I guess, the creation story, that we have no independent witnesses to from the Jewish people, at least once we have Jewish people or from their ancestors. Bilak and Balaam is the story is very interesting because had the Torah not recorded it, we probably wouldn't have even known about it. Other than the rest of the stories, the rest of the events in the Torah that are chronicled, we generally would have had some type of oral tradition passed down. So we're going to we've in the past we've talked about some of the messages that Bil'am has given. I'm going to do that about 10 times tonight, get the two names confused. Um, and this week I want to focus on chapter 24, the first couple of verses, which is basically the introduction, Bil'am's introduction to, or the Torah's introduction to Bil'am's third, if you will, pronouncement, third of four. And if we think about the parish is basically described up till this point, that Bil'am is hired by Balak to come and curse the Jewish people. He says first, he says I can't go because God won't let me go. Bil'am sends Balak sends another delegation, and ultimately Bil'am does go, and Balak travels around with him to different places, different vantage points, hoping that in one of these vantage points, God will allow Bil'am to pronounce some type of curse on Am Yisrael that will allow him, Balak, to be able to be victorious over them in his struggle with them. Although he doesn't realize that they've been proscribed from invading his territory by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So after two failed attempts in which Bil'am has not yet done what Balak wants, he tries one more time, but after Bil'am has told Balak to bring these korbanot, which is something he tells him every time, bring 7 korbanot, and I'll see what Hashem has to say. This time it tells us in Pasuk Aleph of chapter 24, Vayar Bil'am, that Bil'am sees, Kitov be'enei Hashem levarech et Yisrael, that it's good in the eyes of Hashem to bless Am Yisrael. And therefore he does not go like he has on the previous two occasions. He leaves he leaves Balak alone and goes to search to see what he can find about Am Yisrael. And what it tells us is Likrat Nechashim. He was looking for some type of sign, some divination, some type of sign. Vayashet El Amidbar Panav, and he places his face toward the desert. Vayisab Bil'am et Einav, then Bil'am raises up his eyes. Vayaret Yisrael, he sees the children, Bnei Yisrael, Shochein Lishvatav, they are dwelling each according to their tribes. Ati alav ruach Elokim, and falls upon him the spirit of Elokim. Vayisam Shalom Vayomar, and he begins his parable by saying the following: Ne'um Bil'am. This is the words of Bil'am beno Ba'or, who is the son of Ba'or, or perhaps something else. Beno Ba'or, but Ba'or is his son. Une'um Gever Shetum Ha'ayin, and this is spoken by the Gever, the person who has something with his eyes, whether his eye is open or it's closed. We'll see what it means. Ne'um, and again, the third time says Ne'um. These are the words of Shomea Imrei El, the one who hears the words of God. Shemachazeh Shaddai Yechazeh, and the vision of God he sees. Nofel, falling Ugluyenayim, and with again something about his eyes, either open or covered. We'll see what the parshanim have to say about that. But these are the pasukim we're going to try to focus on tonight. And by the way, the next pasuk is probably the most famous pasuk of the whole parsha of Balak. Matovu Alach Yaakov, first that we say when we enter the Beit Knesset. Matovu Alach Yaakov Vishkanotecha Yisrael is the verse that follows these 4 verses. But we're not going to get to that tonight. We're going to talk about these verses as much as we can. So we're going to, as usual, begin with Rashi. Rashi says, what does it mean, Vayar Bil'am Kitov B'nei Hashem? What does it mean that Bil'am saw suddenly he sees after God's told him all along, I'm not going to let you curse the Jewish people. He finally realizes, okay, I'm here if I'm doing God's work, I'm going to have to bless the Jewish people. Amar, he said to himself, Eini tzarech livdok. I no longer have to search B'Hakadosh Baruch Hu to test and challenge God. Ki lo yachpotz l'kal olam. There's no way God is going to allow me to curse them. Okay, I've got that figured out finally. It took him a little while to get that message, but finally now it seems, at least Rashi says, that he's got that message. V'lohalach kefam b'fam. And he did not leave Balak alone like he did and the other two times, because he's done that already twice. In other words, if we go through the parsha, we find the first time Bil'am, Balak asks him to curse the Jewish people. He tells him bring these offerings, then he disappears for a while. And he does that twice. Now we're in the third time already. So this time he doesn't go. Likrat nechashim. What does it mean, nechashim? Now again, nechashim has two different means. One meaning of nechashim is omens or signs or some type of divination. The other meaning, of course, nechashim means snakes, serpents. Okay, but Rashi says nechashim here means lenachesh, means to divine, to try to do some form of divination. Perhaps God will come to meet me. I want God to come and meet me halfway. I've done him. I've given them a blessing. Now he should come to meet me and let me give him a curse. Omar Rabbi Bil'am says, Rotza v'ena rotza l'kalam. I might think that maybe, but God really does want, but he doesn't want. However, what does Bil'am say I will do instead? Since I can't curse the Jewish people, what will he do? As kar avonotehem, I will remember and I will recall and I will recount before God the sins of the Jewish people. V'klala, and the curse will fall automatically. Alaskarat ha'avera tachol, that the curse will be caused by God remembering the sins that Am Yisrael has done. So Bil'am realizes that the only curse that he can give to Am Yisrael is to mention their sins before God and hope that God will be angry enough at him because of those sins. Now, this is a very interesting Rashi. Rashi only has one word, and he says "kitargumo," as it is translated in Targum. Now, the words literally mean, and he places his face. In other words, he places his face, means he looks to the midbar, to the desert. Now, it's interesting because you'll notice I don't have the Targum here on the thing because there are two different versions of the Targum. Targum has two different versions. And I looked through a number of different Chumashim to try to understand what Rashi means when he says Ketargumo. And if I look in the Targum of Onkelos, the Aramaic translation of Torah, in different Chumashim, I found different renditions of this. And in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash, he brings down both of these as alternate versions of Onkelos. The first one, which is the one I saw originally when I was reading Rashi and learning through it, says which simply means he places his face toward the desert. He looks out on the desert where the Jews are camped. But the other version that I said is brought down in some of the Chumashim that I saw, and is brought down, as I said, in the Stone Chumash, brings both down, says, V'shaveh lekavel egla da'avudu Yisrael demidbara, that he turns to look, to greet, to think about, to mention the sin of the golden calf that the Jews did in the desert. So that the word that he places his face toward the desert is, he thinks about, he puts his mind to thinking about the sin of the golden calf. Why he picks the sin of the golden calf as being in the desert, don't know. Could have been the sin of the Meraglim. But again, I think because it's 40 years have passed and the sin of the Meraglim, the generation that sinned, is gone, whereas the Chet HaEgel, it seems, as Hashem tells, is something that stays with Am Yisrael for every generation. That's probably why Rashi, or our Targum, focuses, at least according to that opinion, on the sin of the golden calf. But I thought it was interesting that Rashi uses the one word Ketargumo without quoting the Targum that he's using, and we have two different versions of the Targum. So, but again, if you'll notice, as I said, the highlighted part in yellow from above, Rashi seems to be going in the direction that I would think of the second one that I quoted, which says that Bil'am here is focusing on the Chet HaEgel, because that's what he wants for God to focus on. He wants God to focus on Am Yisrael's sins, and therefore no bracha will be able to fall on them if Hashem is focusing on their sins. Okay, Vayashtem Bil'am et Einav. Now Bil'am raises his eyes, and Rashi again does not give Bil'am the benefit of the doubt here. He says, Bikesh lachnis bahem ayin ra. He looks at them in order to give them an ayin hara, an ayin ra. An ayin ra means you look at somebody who's got blessings, and because you're looking at them in such a way, it causes those Hashem to see, are they really worthy of those blessings? That's what the classic definition of ayin ra'ah is. When we say bli ayin ra, we mean we don't want somebody to give us great praise, and that great praise will cause Hashem to say, "Oi, maybe they're not worthy of such praise." That's the classic ayin hara, and that's what Rashi says Bil'am was trying to do to Am Yisrael. And now he says, by the way, this completes a cycle that we learned about in the Mishnah. And we realize that Bil'am has three different characteristics that are mentioned in Pirkei Avot. Ayin ra'ah, he has an evil eye. Ruach gavoa, a very haughty spirit. V'nefesh rechava, and a soul that covets all. So Hamur and Lamala, the other two were mentioned previously in the different chapters with different interactions that Bil'am has had so far. But Rashi again uses this here. This is the third of these three terrible characteristics that Bil'am is the prime the paradigm of these terrible characteristics, which cause one to lose everything they have, because they can't even in this world they can't appreciate anything, because all they're looking at is what other people have and how important they are, and how people aren't worthy of being in the same area as they are. And these characteristics, yes, they take us out of Olam Haba because we don't have any merits, but they also take us out of this world because we can't really enjoy everything because we're too busy concentrating and focusing on ourselves and the things we don't have. And that's why Rashi, and that's why the Mishnah there in Pirkei Avot tells us to try to avoid these characteristics at all costs. Shochen lishvatav. What does it mean, Shochen lishvatav? They were dwelling, each tribe dwelt individually. Ra kol shevet v'shevet shochen liatzmo. He saw that each tribe had its own territory, its own area of encampment. Ve'ena nu'uravim, and they didn't mix up and get confused. Everybody knew their place. What else did he see? Ra'ah she'ein pitchem mechuvanim zeh keneged zeh. That the openings of the tent were not opposite one another. Even when they were camped in rows, the tent openings were not directly opposite one another. So people weren't sitting and looking into other people's tents to find out other people's business. Everybody was dealing with what they had to deal with and treated each other appropriately. And that's what he saw. Batia love Ruach Elokim, and the Ruach of Elokim falls upon him. Rashi says, now finally, after all of these things, and he sees Am Yisrael, he says, Allah belibo, he decides, Shalo Yikalein, he's not going to curse them because it's going to do no good anyway, so he decides he cannot curse them. Even though he wanted to, he didn't. Okay, I'm going to skip the rest and come back to it later. We get to the next two psukim. I want to go first through the first two, and then we'll see if we get through the next two, how much time we have left. Rashbam. Now, Rashbam, interestingly, goes a very different direction. He does not go like he did previously to seek out omens and divination. What does that mean? Lenasot mimakom lemakom, to walk from place to place. Because he was in the previous two times he went from place to place trying to find a place where he might be able to curse them. But this time, Elameata nitkaven lebarcham belev shalem. Rashi, unlike Rashbam, unlike Rashi, who says he really still is looking for an opening to try to sneak a curse in here. Rashbam says no, he's decided, can't beat him, might as well join him. All right, let me go give him a bracha, a full-hearted bracha he wants to give him. And now once he's made this decision that he's going to give him a full-hearted, wholehearted bracha, then it says, Vatialav Ruach Elokim. Kan, here it says that he is blessed with the Ruach of Elohim. And all the other places, in the other two places where he's speaking, it's that Hashem forces him to say what he's saying. Here already, he's speaking kiviyachol as a free agent on his own, and that's why the Ruach of Hashem, he gets a spiritual message from God, but in a very different way. The spirit of Hashem rested upon him, me'ava, from the fact that he now decides wholeheartedly to bless Am Yisrael, but derech chiba, with love for Am Yisrael. Now he's reached a point where he can be worthy of Ruach Elokim falling on him. Okay. Ramban. Remember, we got two different perspectives. One, he's still trying to curse them. The other is, no, he's finally given up and realizes that the only thing to do here is to give him a bracha. Ramban says the following: Keep it. Amim harishonim. The first two times, he was trying to divine. He was trying through some divination to find a way to curse them. Hashem ba'elav, and as I said, the first two times Hashem came, b'derech mikreh. Hashem, by happen chance, appears to him, and that's why it says v'ikar Elokim el Bil'am. Both of the first two times says Hashem appears to Bil'am. Lo b'chavanato l'nevuah, not because he was looking and trying to have a spirit of prophecy. The lo b'ma'alato shigiyai love. It is not because of his spiritual level that he's at that Hashem appears to him. The ata, but now kasher nemar lo, when he said already the second time, kilo nachash b'Yaakov. There's no divination in Yaakov, lo kesem b'Yisrael. There's no sorcery in Israel. Lahara o leitiv lahem, either to harm them or to benefit them. He niach hanechashim. He gives up. He says, okay, that's what God told me. Divination isn't going to work here. The sorcery isn't going to work here. He leaves that path. And he doesn't try like he did in the previous past to try to find some omen or divine divination that he can use to curse Am Yisrael. Avo samet panav el hamidbar. He places himself to the desert, Asher Yisrael Sham, where Israel is. Sheyira otam, because he wants to look at them and see them. Yachin lahem nafsho, and he wants to prepare himself spiritually. Sheyachol alav hadibur me'et Hashem, that Hashem's word should fall upon him, a word of words of prophecy. Kasher asay mo pamayim, like he's already done twice. In other words, twice God has sent him a message, but the message only appeared because he had to stop Bil'am from trying to curse them. And this is what actually occurs now, that he actually does get a, quote, a real prophecy, not just a God interrupting him, interfering with him, and trying to curse Am Yisrael and forcing him to give the bracha. But here he is already, if you will, having a revelation, a divine revelation. Alkein Amar Vati Alav Ruach Elokim, and that's why the verse continues that the Spirit of Hashem falls upon him. Ki Ata Haita Alav Yad Hashem Kasher Hi L'Neviim. Now he gets a true prophetic message from God, like the other prophets. Because we know that Ruach of Hashem, Ruach Elokim, refers to us in certain contexts, refers to a spirit of prophecy. As we saw before, that Hashem should make all of the Am Yisrael Nevi'im. How? By placing his spirit of Nevuah on Am Yisrael. So the word Ruach is, when we say Ruach or Ruach Elokim or Ruach Hashem, it generally refers to a spirit of prophecy in the proper context. Not always, but in most times it refers to a spirit of prophecy. The Omer, and he brings another pasuk, Ruach Hashem Elokim alai, the Ruach of Hashem was upon me, and from Yeshayahu. Al Kain Kara Atzmo Ata. That's why now, it's only now that he gives this whole thing in verse 4. He says, Shomea Imrei El, the one who has heard the words of God. Because up until now, even though he was speaking, he wasn't really hearing the words of God in the sense of Nevu'ah, of a Navi. Ki Navihu. But this time, for this prophecy, for this third message, he becomes a prophet. At least that's what Ramban wants to say. The Rashi Katav, now Rashi wrote, Vayosher Elamid Bar Panav. that when it says that he turned to face the midbar is kitargumo, like the Targum interpreted it. Ki haya Rav. Again, he goes, now what does that mean? The Rav, meaning Rashi, was Metargembo. He saw the Targum, the version of the Targum that he has, the Shaveh Lemidbara, the Avidu Be B'nei Yisrael Egla Anapohi. In other words, he turned toward the Midbar, where Am Yisrael worshipped the Egel. That's where he turned his face toward the Midbar, to focus on the Chedo Egel. The Ein Benuscha Onuduk Tok Mitargumo Shel Unkelus Kain. But the proper versions of Unkelus do not include that phraseology. Avalu Katuv Biktatan Shehoga Behen Mina Targum HaYerushalmi. But some of the versions of Unkelus have included this phraseology that they took from the Targum Yerushalmi. However, V'ha'ika Mashe Pirashnu. The main, plain, simple meaning of the text is, like we explained, that it means that he really had the spirit of HaKadosh Baruch Hu upon him this time, not this that he was looking to the Chedo Egel and trying to find a way to still get at Am Yisrael. The Amar, and then later he says, Asher Machazeh Shaddai Yechazeh. Okay, we're going to skip this part because it relates to Pesukim Dal and Hey. We'll get back to this perhaps later. And let's go to it's a long run on this Pesukim. Playakar. Okay. Playakar. Vayar Bil'am, and Bil'am saw Kitov B'nei Hashem L'varech et Yisrael, that it was good in the eyes of Hashem to bless Yisrael. Kitovim Hema B'nei Hashem. He saw that. What does it mean? What's Kitov B'nei Hashem L'varech Yisrael? Why is it good in the eyes of Hashem to bless the Am Yisrael? Because Am Yisrael was good in the eyes of Hashem. Kitov B'nei Hashem wants him to bless Am Yisrael because Am Yisrael is worthy of blessing. Therefore, so he does not go likrat nechashim. Now, remember, we've translated nechashim. Generally, the commentators we've seen so far have translated nechashim as omens, some type of sign or symbol or divination. Hainu, what does Kleyakar say? Nechashim means lachkor acharei pish'ehem l'chol chatotam. In other words, he is searching. In other words, when it says likrat nechashim, when Bil'am was searching for nechashim, it means literally serpents. Why did serpents have to do with what he was searching for? He was searching for their sins that they have committed, hanasim bet yoshel nachash hakadmonim, that are done through the influence of the original serpent in Gan Eden. Vayashet el hamidbar panav, and he turns toward the midbar, his face toward the midbar. Kidamasik bishmot rabbah. What does the midbar come to allude to? If we look in pasuk in Shir Hashirim, says Mizot olamin hamidbar. Who is this who is arising, coming up from the desert? What does it mean, olamin hamidbar? That he's rising from the desert. Kol ma'alatan shel Yisrael. All of the greatness of Am Yisrael comes min hamidbar, comes from the desert. What does that mean, that all of the greatness of Am Yisrael comes from the desert? Kavanat HaMidrash, the intent of this Midrash, the Kleyakar says, Shebiskut ha'anava ha'metzuya b'Yisrael, in the merit of the humility, of the modesty that Am Yisrael displays. How does that mean? Shosimot, what does that have to do with the desert? Shosim et atzmam kamidbar zeh, that they treat themselves, or they make themselves like the desert. What is the characteristic that the desert has that Am Yisrael emulates, according to this Midrash? Shakol dashim alav. Everybody treads on the midbar. Midbar doesn't get any respect. So Am Yisrael, even when people tread on them, they still don't give up their connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because of that, Zachu Yisrael l'chol hamalot, the Ben Yisrael are worthy of all of the great things, all of the elevation. K'moshe darshu Chazal, like Chazal explained in Gemara and Eruvin, al pasuk umi midbar matana. From midbar they rise to matana. There are different levels of we rise in Torah because of our commitment to Torah, but also our commitment to anivut, to not holding ourselves up and say, "Oh, see, we have the Torah. See how great we are as Am Yisrael." No, it's a responsibility, and we don't go around parading it as though, oh, see how great we are. That's a very important mala, he says. Umiyad, and immediately, kashenatan einav, when Bil'am now places his eyes to look at Am Yisrael, the saper b'chol ha'ma'alot asher zachu la'min hamidbar, he wants to, what is he going to do now? He is going to praise them with all of these wonderful, great accomplishments that they have merited because of how they have been through the desert, how they have learned this lesson from the desert of being modest, of being low, not being haughty and not being proud of over proud of their accomplishments. Why does he want to do this? Kleachar says, again, his goal, according to Kleachar, is not to praise Am Yisrael and say, look how great they are. It's to praise Yisrael, say how great they are. So, again, classic Ayin Hara, so that Hashem will look at them and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe they're not worthy of all this great praise, of all this great things that people are praising him with. Miyad, as soon as he tried now to praise them with the intent that should cause them an ayin hara and cause Hashem to be angry at them, miyad nismit eino. Immediately his eye was closed. He could no longer see them. Lefikach karatz atzma. Therefore he calls himself Shtuma Ayin, the one whose vision was cut off. Dafka b'pam hazeh. Only here at the third time when he's looking at Am Yisrael does he say, nah, my vision is now clouded. I've lost my vision. Aval Rashi, according to Rashi, Shapirish, who's going to explain Shenismid al Amro Misparat Rova Yisrael for a different reason. Kashalamalo Karatzmo came in Shnia. It's going to be challenging why he doesn't say this earlier. So Kleakar very simply says that what happened here is, again, very similar to what Rashi says in intent, that again, Bil'am is trying to find a back door, if you will, to try to get in and sneak something in, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be angry at Am Yisrael. Either, again, first he thinks, the first two times he's thinking about finding the places they've sinned, he realizes that didn't work. So he tries a roundabout approach of heaping praise on Am Yisrael so that Hashem will say, hey, wait a minute, are they really worth this praise? What we call the classic case of Ayin Hara. Again, because his mission that he's, quote, being paid for is to lower Am Yisrael, not to praise Am Yisrael and raise them up. So he's got to find some type of backdoor because Hashem says, nah, this is a no-go. You can't curse Am Yisrael. You can't do anything against Am Yisrael. That Hashem is protecting Am Yisrael throughout this entire chapter. But again, Kleakar says he's trying to find a backdoor in to do it. We shouldn't think that even when he's, quote, praising Am Yisrael, he's praising them wholeheartedly. He's still trying to figure out a sneaky way to get at Am Yisrael. Orachayim. Vayar Bil'am Kitov. Okay. U'ledivreihem zal. According to Chazal, who say in Midrash Rabbah, she'amru b'feirush pasuk, they try to explain the pasuk, Ki baruchu, shamar Shem leVil'am. In the beginning, the first time Balak's messengers come to Bil'am, Hashem says, Lo telech imahem, lo taret ha'am ki baruchu. You shouldn't curse the people because it is blessed. And Hashem is telling Bil'am, you don't have to go bless them, but you can't go curse them, but you can't go bless them. Nitkalin lomar, the intent there of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's message to Bil'am, al zeh haderech, because of this. Tov b'nei Hashem levarech, it is fine in the eyes of Hashem to give them blessing. Perush, Hashem, she'izkir b'samuch, the eino chozer al Bil'am. It doesn't mean ki tov b'nei Hashem levarech et Yisrael. It's good for Hashem to give the blessings to Am Yisrael, not through Bil'am. In other words, we often translate this, as I said, translate at the beginning, that Bil'am saw it was good in the eyes of Hashem to bless Israel, that Hashem wanted Bil'am to, or that it would be good for Bil'am to bless Israel. Our Chaim HaKadosh saying no. What it means is Bil'am saw that it's good for Hashem. Hashem wants to bless Am Yisrael himself. He doesn't want Bil'am blessing Am Yisrael. He doesn't need Bil'am to bless Am Yisrael. He wants to bless Am Yisrael himself. Perush Hashem, in other words, when it says Levarech et Yisrael, it's referring not to Bil'am, but to Hashem. Shehiskir b'samuch. The Eino chozer al Bil'am. It's not returning back to Bil'am. It says that Bil'am saw that Hashem wanted him, Bil'am, to bless Am Yisrael. Ki chvar amar lo Hashem, because Hashem has already told Bil'am, Ki varuchu, that Am Yisrael is blessed, Eino tzarech levarcham. and you don't need to give them a blessing. Hagam shematzinu shayim avarchem. Oh, wait a minute. We already found that twice already he has given them a bracha. So what does it mean that Bil'am saw that it was good that he shouldn't bless them? The only reason that Bil'am has pronounced two passages that appear to be blessings of Am Yisrael were because Hashem was forced, Bil'am was ready to curse them. And Hashem had to take the words as they were coming out of Bil'am's thought and becoming words and turn them into brachot. So in other words, the first two times that Bil'am is talking, what he is saying is not what he's thinking. What comes out of his mouth is the exact opposite of what he's thinking. He's thinking, I want to curse Am Yisrael. And Hashem is forcing the words to come out of his mouth as a bracha. Okay, that's what happened the first two times. As Arachim has already explained in the last time, Hashem put either a word or something in the mouth of Bil'am. Lo Bil'am hayamevarech. Bil'am is not the one who is uttering the blessings, even though the words are coming out of his mouth. Ela malach hayamevarchem b'fiv. The angel is reciting, an angel of God, a messenger of God, is reciting the words that are coming out of Bil'am's mouth. The hefsek zavar lefiv, through the intervention of interrupting Bil'am's ability to speak and basically projecting something else out of his mouth while he is speaking. So again, seems very interesting that the Or Chaim is telling us that Bil'am never is not the one who's blessing Am Yisrael, even though the words are coming out of his mouth. They're not his words. They're words of somebody else. The Omra, okay, and how this pasuk here is trying to explain to us. He doesn't go like the previous two times. Perush, what does that mean? Hechlit, he just realized Bil'am after two times trying, he gives up. He doesn't want to try the third time. He realizes she'ein tikva me Hashem. There is no hope that Hashem laskim lahara Yisrael. Hashem, there's no way Hashem is going to agree to do anything evil to Am Yisrael, and that he will be able to do anything to Am Yisrael. Gam, therefore, lo halach kefam b'fam, he doesn't go like previous times to see what he can find. Mishum she'ein tochelet me'anafashim. There's nothing to be gained by looking at the sources, the divination, the going to the different places. Lazeh, therefore, nidchakam bi'etza ra'ah. He's got a trick up his sleeve. He figures out this is what he's going to try to do. He's going to kind of come up with some advice, some bad way. What is that? Who? He turns and focuses on the desert. Perush, what does that mean that he focuses on the desert? Lirot, to see what Am Yisrael, all of the times Hashem, Am Yisrael has angered Hashem in the desert. Perhaps through mentioning all of the times that Am Yisrael has angered Hashem throughout the time they've been in the Midbar, he'll be able to come up with something that will reflect negatively, and he'll be able to curse Am Yisrael. So again, Or Chaim reaches the same conclusion, but he goes through a little bit differently how to reach that conclusion. The conclusion being, as I said, the only exception so far we've seen was Rashbam, who says, no, he really wanted to give Am Yisrael a bracha. He finally surrendered. All the other Parshatim say, no, he's still looking for a backdoor in to try to find a way to do evil, to harm Am Yisrael. Oh, perhaps he's Bar Lashon Dibur Kederach Sheperes B'Zohar. Perhaps that when it says Vayasam Davar B'Fiv, that Hashem put words in his mouth, it means that that the midbar is to symbolize all of those words of speech, the misuse of speech that happened. The pasuk, as we saw, the Zohar says when it says Avinu meit b'midbar, but midbar, even though midbar generally means desert, vayasem el hamidbar, the root of midbar can also be daled bet reish hamidaber, somebody who speaks, lashon dibur, language of speak. V'hakavana, and the intent of the Zohar of translating the midbar as a cognate of speech rather than referring to the desert. V'hakavana, the intent here is l'fishakola eser nisyonot, all of the 10 times Shenisu Yisrael hamakom hayu b'dibur. Every time that Am Yisrael sins, there's speech involved. There's always some type of speech involved when Am Yisrael is complaining to Hashem. Where are they? They're Al Yam Suf. When the Egyptians are chasing after them, what are they doing? They complain, Moshe, why'd you take us out of Egypt? Aren't there enough graves in Egypt? At the Egel, they said, who's going to be the leader instead of Moshe? Aaron, give us a leader. Give us somebody to take Moshe's place. By the complainers who complained about that they were complaining about something else. B'meraglim, through the Meraglim, was also all about the power of speech or the abuse of the power of speech. Biadat Korach, with Korach, also power of speech. Mei Merivah, when they complain again for water. All of these are involved with speech. Kulam hayu chotim b'dibur. Every one of the 10 cases that we're talking about involves abuse, misuse of the power of speech. V'chashav. And so Bil'am is thinking, Ki bichlalot Yisrael shahayu leneged panav, and include all of these things of Am Yisrael that are facing me. Yimtza'um rabim mikitot amidabrim. He'll find, if I look and I focus on Am Yisrael as a group, they include lots of speaking groups who have spoken negatively during this 40 years, the Derech Sham Yikalel, and through that, perhaps he will find a way to bring down Am Yisrael. So again, either through what they did in the Midbar, through the Chet HaEgel, or through the power of speech. That's another way of looking at this concept of Midbar. Odi Ratzeh, Al Pi Divrei Hamzal. Another way of looking at this is, again, according a different mamar in the Zohar. Shenemar, she'amru, ki hamidbar hu makom chanut, so milim harasha. That the midbar, is the chanut of Samael, the Rasha, of the evil inclination. By looking in the desert, he is trying to awaken the kochot of evil, the power of evil. The huamro, as he would say, this is the place where all of the negative influences of the world collect. And all his armies. So in Am B'nai Yisrael, those who ate Am Yisrael, they all come from where? From the desert. Again, this is Midrash, this is Zohar, but okay. V'diktu klamar panav. Why does it say the face of Elayasmet panav al midbar panav? Why does he turn his face toward the midbar? Ulai shetit orer haklipa be'emtzaut hakaas. Perhaps that I can awaken all of these latent forces of evil through the power of anger. Because we know that by rejoicing and by being happy of heart, that can elevate us to sanctity. When we are rejoicing in doing a mitzvah, that raises the joy that we attach to doing the mitzvah, the energy and the joy that we attach to doing the mitzvah, that awakens the holiness. So opposite, hafuch, in the same way evil works, that by being angry and being in a negative frame of mind, I can strengthen and awaken all of the negative forces that are in the desert. That's what Zohar is saying, and that's what Bil'am is trying to do. Every power will awaken when it sees a cognate, it sees a familiar emotion, a familiar relation. It will awaken. Husha panav lashon kas. That's why it uses the word is panav to allude to anger. Where do we see that? Kederach amro panay elechu shu lashon kas. Hashem says, I will turn my face away from you, Moshe, and that's the lesson that shows that he was angry. So that's another way of looking at this. The midbar represents all of the evil forces that are gathered in the midbar, that are latent there, and Bil'am is trying to awaken them and join them together to create this evil force against Am Yisrael. Oh, Efshar, or another possibility. Another way of looking at this whole story of Vayasam Helabel, Ki mishu tov, whoever is good, hu be'nei Hashem roi levarech Yisrael. Somebody who is a good person, he is worthy to bless Am Yisrael. Al derech omro, as the pasuk in Proverbs says in Mishlei, tov ayin hu yivorach. If you want to get a blessing from somebody, you should get a blessing from somebody who has a good eye, who is not stingy, who is willing to give of himself, so that you should have a bracha. Tov ayin hu yivorach. Yamuzal al tikre yivorach. He will be blessed. Ela yivarech. He should be the one giving the blessing. In other words, somebody who is blessed is somebody who should be giving a blessing. And the intent here is kihu liyoto ra'ayin. Since Bil'am is stingy, he's got an evil eye. Ki yadua, it's well known, lo netanu Hashem levarech. Hashem will not allow him to pronounce a blessing. Kiramuz b'mamar ki varuchu, as Hashem has already alluded to, the reason you, Bil'am, can't give a blessing to Am Yisrael, because you are not the right person suited to give a blessing to Am Yisrael. They're already blessed. Umizeh Gish, and from here Bil'am felt ki nifsal liyoto ra'ayin. He has to give away, he has to stop and give up his characteristic of ra'ayin, of being with an evil eye. Since he could not, because of who he was in spirit, how his whole outlook on life, he could not pronounce blessings. He could only pronounce curses. That's all he knew how to do, was to curse people. And that was his whole power, was he knew how to curse people at the right time. But if he wants to give a blessing, he cannot do that until he changes his whole outlook on life, his whole focus, his whole demeanor, his whole personality. Therefore, I'm not going to go look for omens of evil, because that's how I find evil. That's how I go curse people. I find negative things about them and I raise them up and I cause them to be cursed. Therefore, Vayashin al Hamidbar, he turns to the desert, Perush, Asher hu chonesham Elokim, where Hashem's presence, where again, if he looks at Am Yisrael and he sees the Shekhinah resting on them, he sees HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Makom Machaneh Shekhinah, and he sees the presence of Hashem, Umarad b'sharesh nishmato, and this really, he has to rebel against his whole root feeling, his whole root instinct, his whole life is built on negativity. By getting rid of this negativity, he thought, okay, now I can be good, I can focus on good, Yisrael, and will be able to give Am Yisrael a bracha. However, the pasuk says, he didn't do this because he really wanted. He only is doing this from the intent, what? He felt, if I make believe by looking and focusing on being good, and I make believe I'm going to be good, maybe I can trick God. And perhaps his intent was, not that he's going to trick God, but he could trick the angel that's controlling his vocal cords and what he says. That he will remove this impediment, that they'll take this angel that's basically controlling the words that come out of his mouth, and he'll be able to speak as he wants. He'll be able to be a free agent and really speak. And then he'll be able to word something that might look like a blessing, but he'll word it very wisely in a way that can be interpreted negatively. Kimosha Asakain, Yomram Zal, as the Gemara wants to say that many times, that's what it says. Beferish Omro Kinachalim, Kalim. In other words, that he even when he gives them a bracha, he's giving them a bracha that doesn't always have a good interpretation. The Gemara there says that the curses of Achiyah Hashiloni are better than the brachot of Bil'am, because Bil'am blesses them to be an eres, to be a beam, a strong cedar tree, and Achiyah Hashiloni curses them that they'll be like a reed. And the Gemara there says, well, a reed may be a tall, low, and lowly, but at least it's flexible and it bends with the wind and it doesn't break. Whereas a cedar tree, when a strong enough wind comes, it knocks it over and pulls it out because it doesn't have a strong root system. So again, even when Bil'am wants to give them a bracha, he doesn't really want to give them a bracha. He wants to give them a bracha that's going to be temporary, it's going to be transient, that's going to be not always fulfillable. But nonetheless, the Spirit of Hashem was able to negate what he wanted to do. Not like you wanted. So we see again, the Ohr HaKadosh goes in a number of different ways, but all of them end really at the same point. Bil'am is Bil'am. He is thoroughly wicked, no matter how we slice it, no matter what angle you come at. He is so thoroughly wicked, but he's trying his hardest to figure out some way that he can, quote, outsmart Hashem and be able to sneak in a curse or something negative against Am Yisrael. And that's, I think, the importance of this week's parsha. And the lesson, the primary lesson that we learn from this week's parsha, and when you look at the whole parsha, is really that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is aware of those that are trying to harm Am Yisrael, and he is watching out for Am Yisrael, even though there are times in history where it doesn't seem that way. It might not seem that Hashem is watching out for Am Yisrael. And there are times when Hashem turns away from Am Yisrael, but even those times, when we think Hashem has turned away from Am Yisrael, Hashem is still protecting Am Yisrael, that we should not be destroyed, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a covenant with Am Yisrael that we will always exist. Even in the most challenging of times, Hashem ensures our continued existence and continues to send bracha on Am Yisrael in ways we don't understand and we don't even see sometimes. And that's really the lesson of the parsha of Balak and Bil'am, and this whole events are really to remind us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is watching out for Am Yisrael, and that ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu will redeem us completely, and we'll send Mashiach Tzidkeinu b'mehera v'yameinu. I thank you for listening. I hope this was okay, it worked, and questions, comments, and feedback at this point. Anybody?
Okay, good night.
All right. Laila Tov to all. Have a good rest of the week. And we'll see you, B'ezras Hashem, next week, same time. Laila Tov.